Hello, hello. I'm Kier.
And I'm Liam.
And this is Hot Take Think Tank, a podcast for culture war dropouts about awkward trade-offs in the pursuit of progress.
So, Kier, you have been accused of being a secret centrist for a truly baffling reason.
I have been. It is true. I have been accused.
Mm-hmm. But before we get into what caused this accusation, I'm curious what you think of being called a centrist now and what you would have thought of it back in your social justice days.
Oh my gosh. I mean, a centrist is like one of the worst things, like one of the worst things you could possibly call someone on the far left.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a Nazi is worse than a left or than a centrist, but you know, they're pretty close together. Yeah, I don't know. There definitely was a time when even like, say I had like a conservative comment on something that I wrote, like that would be evidence that like I'm in cahoots.
Oh, right. That you're mingling with the wrong people.
Exactly, right? Because I don't know, it's so funny how into basically the echo chamber a lot of people are. And so yeah, guilt by association, like everything is very contagious. You have to only read from your side. You can only talk to people from your side.
Right. Totally.
So yeah, I guess, yeah, it is rather centrist of me to like not like block people, I guess.
Right. To like acknowledge that there are people who disagree with you is like a radical act of centrism.
Exactly.
But so today, do you? I don't think you would identify as a centrist, but do you take offense to the idea, or?
I mean, I don't really take offense to the idea because I've come around to believing that like reasonable people disagree on all sorts of things. And I don't know, I'm just like tired of thinking that like all centrists are evil and all right-wingers are super evil. And I don't know. It's just tiring. I'm bored by it. And I also just think that like, even from a pure stance of like, okay, if I'm a socialist and I want to persuade other people, it actually really benefits me to understand other arguments and to engage with them seriously and to be able to actually respond to them instead of responding to some weird like boogeyman version of what they are.
Right, totally. Just to be able to not dismiss things out of hand because they're so wrong, like that. It's almost like you have a different fundamental understanding of the whole everything if you don't agree with me on this.
Well, exactly, because then you're like barely talking, like you're not going to change anyone's minds because you're mischaracterizing the other side so much that they're like, what? You don't even understand what I'm saying. So like, why would I listen to you? It just like perpetuates the echo chambers to like be so dismissive of each other all the time.
It's like the opposite of trying to find like common ground from which you can build like a relationship that you know, maybe win someone over with in time.
Exactly.
But I think we should get back to what brought these accusations about your wildly centrist activity you were partaking in.
Yes. So I got this message on Instagram asking me or saying, I'm trying to figure out if you're a secret centrist. And I said, well, you know, I have plenty of podcasts and essays that are public and you can... I'm very open about where I'm coming from. But this person said like they will not be reading or listening to anything I've made until they're reassured that we're like significantly aligned, which I feel like is maybe a little backwards. But anyways, so the evidence they put forward that I am a centrist is that I am reading a companion to Marx's Capital by David Harvey, a Marxist geographer who this person considers to be a social democrat.
It's so wild to be accused of being a centrist for reading Marx wrong. Like, you're reading Marx.
Yeah.
That's like... not a traditional centrist figure, Marx, is he? I don't think so.
No. And like in our reading group, like we are critiquing David Harvey's approach, and we're being like, oh, it's interesting how he's like aligning himself with the consumer rather than the worker in this example. So we're literally like discussing the issues in Harvey's perspective.
And also
in the reading group.
think probably some issues with Marx's perspective.
Sure,
but I mean, does that make you a centrist? I don't know.
It's just, it's
wild.
so silly. And like, oh my gosh, I have read so much more treacherous books. Like that is like...
Right. Okay,
wow.
You did mention that in your essay. And I just got to ask, like, do you want to share anything with the group? Are there any like real scandalous books that, might get more accusations flung your way?
That's exactly, yes. I would love more accusations, please.
I mean, we're a few minutes in now, so hopefully anyone who's worried about centrists has scrolled away long ago or
hopefully
pulled out their earbuds, thrown their phone in the river in disgust.
I hope so. I mean, I think like the first book that I picked up when I was leaving social justice that felt like, oh, I can't believe, like if someone saw me reading this, was called The Coddling of the American Mind.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And the name of the authors, there's Greg Lukianoff, and then there's a second author whose name I'm forgetting, mostly because there's two writers whose names are almost the same, and I'm worried I'm going to say the wrong one.
Sure.
Anyways, there will be a link in the show notes. But yeah, that one is like sort of about how like campus culture has become like more and more about safetyism, right? With like safe spaces
sort of,
and trigger warnings, and how this culture is like bad for people. It's like kind of the opposite of like cognitive behavioral therapy in a lot of ways, where it's like what doesn't kill you makes you weaker and more vulnerable, and sure
and
you
also
don't hear a bad word at university.
Yeah, totally. Maybe it's also opposed to like some of the traditional goals of a university, like exposing you to differing worldviews. I think it's something a lot of people see as an advantage of university.
Some people are into that. Yeah, some people are into that. And then I guess maybe my most treacherous podcast might be The Fifth Column.
Okay, I don't know that one.
Okay, so that is done by three libertarians. Dun, dun, dun. And they call their podcast a weekly rhetorical assault on the news cycle. So it's quite interesting, and I get a lot out of it, even though I have disagreements with the people doing it.
Which sort of gets at the funny thing about the idea of like that what media you consume like reflects something like fundamental about you, right? That like if you the only person who would ever, listen to a libertarian podcast is a libertarian. Yeah. Is like not how it works,
I mean, does like how many like people who watch true crime become serial killers? Like it's so literal. It's such a literal reading of things. Like that's not how that's not how people work. Like we know this, right? Like if you go into a church, you don't suddenly become religious. Right? Like that's not how that works. So
it does remind me of an annoying thing in I love a movie. I'm a real movie guy. This annoying thing that's happened in movie criticism where people complain about the villain being problematic. And
that's
it's like
amazing.
They're a villain. They like the plot is that they're killing people. But then they like also like, I don't know, body shame someone, and it's like, I don't know if I agree with that. It's like,
that's
you're not supposed to.
Far.
They're the bad guy.
No, I love it. Like, it's like this idea that literally all art should be like a fable. Like it's absolutely absurd. Or totally. Propaganda, right? Like the idea that like,
Totally. That it's like a piece of media needs to... But it needs to promote a political ideology, and it needs to be the right political ideology. Is wild. Very like, I don't know. Very focused on the idea that like life is politics, and politics needs to like go into every bit of decision making that people make. Which
100%. So you're saying you're not in support of that?
No, I am not.
Sounds like something a centrist might share.
I mean, if one of us is a centrist, Kier, we both know who it is. But I loved in your essay that you wrote about this event. I found it very interesting, the part where you said, I believed that my political beliefs were so clearly and self-evidently true that it was a waste of my time to read anything that challenged them in the slightest. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was interesting. The second part of the sentence is interesting, but I like the first part where it's like, if you think that you have got this stuff like so figured out, you think it's so true and so like clearly true. It's like, I could see not reading things from outside the bubble, not just because you don't want to be challenged, but because you think whoever's writing them has like missed the trick. Like they've totally dropped the ball, and how could they be insightful on any topic if they don't agree with this, right? Like
there's like nothing to learn from someone like that. And it's so funny because it's like, I don't know, there's like this like ex-Mormon YouTuber who keeps like popping up in my feed, and it's just it's so similar, like where I don't know, it's like this thought stopping, right, where you're like, the first criteria before I'll consider someone's ideas is like whether this person counts as a good person or not, and if they don't, like there's no point, like it's not even worth, and it's just so funny. Like it's just such an impoverished way to live. It's an impoverished way to think. And you just miss out on so much because it's like everyone is problematic. Like who is left? Nobody makes it. There's always a downfall, right? Like all these people competing to be like the wokest of the woke. Like, I'm sorry to tell you, like your time will come. They will come for you. It's not possible to stay pure. It's just not.
I did also love the little detail that you used to Google people's names with the word problematic afterwards. I just think that's so funny, in part because it's like such a leading question for Google, right? It's like, you're saying, show me web pages where this person's name shows up next to the word problematic.
Absolutely.
And it like almost makes, if there's enough people like you doing that, it like makes a market for posts about how everyone's problematic, right? And it like, it's very, I don't know, like self-reinforcing, right? Like, if there's some big new movie star and there's like a hole in Google where you search that name and problematic and nothing shows up, it's like, someone's got to fill that void. Let's write
100%.
Actually, post about him.
It's funny that you would say that. It's so funny because it is literally just being like, what's the dirt? But like,
totally
for social justice reasons, I guess. But there actually was someone, and I'll try and find a link to this article, but there was this person who created this Tumblr, and it was called Your Fave is Problematic. And that's literally what this person did. This person just like combed through the internet to try and figure out like what was wrong with every like person they came across, and it got like really, really popuper and like started like really affecting some people, probably like probably not the most famous people, but this person was like doing a deep dive to find like the worst possible things. Or even just like a one-off, right? Like some celebrity like wore a t-shirt that had the Waco guy on it or something like 10 years ago.
Right,
and
totally.
So I think that person maybe was one of the earlier people who like, just dug through like your past Twitter or whatever.
Totally. All those Twitter ones where it's like the kind of joke everyone, or not everyone, but many, many people were making in like 2008.
Exactly.
And it's like, but things have changed since then. So if you didn't delete your tweets, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. It's because I sometimes wonder if someone is problematic. One time I was listening to Olivia Rodrigo came on, a new pop star, sort of like today's Avril Lavigne. That's how I think of her. And someone I was with was like, oh yeah, she's totally canceled now though. And I was like, oh, I hadn't heard about that. What's going on? And then it was like some drama about how like the whole album she put out is like about a breakup she went through, and that she's been canceled because like the breakup wasn't portrayed accurately in the album. And she's like, it was this ridiculous, like very funny thing. from a very online person. And then my go-to is I just go to the Wikipedia page, because I feel like if something actually matters, it makes it onto the Wikipedia page. If
Right.
it doesn't, if it's just weird internet gossip, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And like, no, the whole
So
page is
funny.
about like, she's a really successful artist and her album's critically acclaimed. And I was like, oh, okay, not canceled then.
That is such a funny
But
accusation to
I'm
make.
sure
against-
though, if I'd Googled Olivia Rodrigo problematic, oh boy, I would have found out all about how she
That's
wronged
where
this
it is.
boy in high school.
Exactly. Well, the funny thing about the person who did the Tumblr is, I think it's a she, and she totally regrets it.
Oh, that is interesting.
She thinks it's like overall was a harmful thing, and she does
Right, just
not
like-
stand by it.
That's it. That's fascinating. You
Yeah.
gotta. Is there an article about this? You gotta send me a link.
Yes, I will put it in the show notes for sure, because
Okay,
I was
awesome.
like, when I heard that person had like changed her tune, I was like, it felt like a
Totally.
sea change, because she kind of was like central to this little tiny subculture about being like, yeah, let's ruin the reputations of every single person who has the audacity to like make something and give it to the public.
Totally. Yeah. I remember. Yeah. There's that one. I have seen another just one that seems funny to me that I hope I haven't missed anything, but it's Chris Pratt. He's like a big movie star who like attends a church that people have a problem with. And it's like not anything that he's done, but it's like the fact that he would associate with a church that before they've had a pastor who said a homophobic thing or something like that. It's just a weird,
Amazing.
a weird thing to measure a movie star by. I mean, I don't know if he's a good guy or not, but it's just, yeah, I don't know. That's
But you don't know based on what his old pastor said either way. So
no, it's true. Not super helpful information, and also weird sort of to be like, I only watch movies with movie stars that have good personal histories.
I know. Good luck. Good luck with
Yeah.
that. I know I've made the mistake a couple times of like looking up the DJs that I was into when I was like 18, 19,
yeah.
20, going to like dubstep shows, and it's like, oh boy, there's some scandals going on over there.
Yeah, for me the worst is whenever you look up like a movie star from the 50s.
Oh boy.
They were
Married
all,
a 13-year-old,
Yeah, exactly.
shot his dad.
Yeah, just like openly detested people of color. Like it's just
Yeah.
there's a lot of that. But
Yeah.
I still think the movies are worth watching a lot of the time. It's not, I mean, they're dead. They don't get money for it.
Well, that's why you're a dirty centrist.
I guess so, yeah. I do love also, there's just something about how you, at this point, put all of these thoughts out there that I really like, where it's like, you mentioned the possibility of this person maybe coming back one day to more fully cancel you. And I just think there's something that I feel like so much canceling is that like someone has a secret, they secretly did this thing in their past and now it's being exposed. And I feel like you're not uncancelable, but the fact that you're like so upfront about all of these political beliefs that like are maybe cancelable, but you like own them, I feel like gives you some sort of armor against being canceled.
I hope so.
I mean, at least among the reasonable, I think.
Yeah.
It's like,
No,
it's not,
true.
I don't know. There's, you're not like two-faced or anything. You're doing everything in good
Right.
faith at the very least, right? There's no
Well,
secret
and
agenda or
exactly. I think that's the main thing I want to get across. It's like, it's totally fine if someone disagrees with me. It's totally fine if they like don't want to read my stuff. Like that
Sure.
is
Yeah,
absolutely
totally.
fine. I'm not for everyone. I'm very aware that I'm not for everyone. But the thing that matters to me is just that it's like what you see is what you get. Like there's no secret hidden thing going on here, And I actually
Totally.
ended up making an Instagram post about that the other day where I was like, some people don't think I'm a leftist. There have been moments where I've wondered that, but guess what? This is how I define it. I believe in this. I always have. And I will tell you if I change my mind. Like you will hear it from me.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
truly, reader, you will hear it from me. Like, if I become a libertarian, or if I suddenly become a right winger, I will tell you, okay? So
totally,
you can relax about that.
yeah. No,
It seems unlikely,
you,
but you also never know, right?
well, yeah, it also would have seemed unlikely however many years ago that you would be writing those posts about the leaving the social justice subculture, right?
Exactly.
So you have a track record of making pretty dramatic shifts and telling people about them. So it's not, we don't have to take your word for it, right? We can look at the history at this point.
Honestly, it's I can't hold it inside for that long, right?
Totally.
I couldn't live like that. I couldn't live being like, oh yeah, I'm totally a leftist, guys, but then secretly inside I'm something that would drive me crazy. Liam, you've known me for a long time. I'm much more likely.
You've never been particularly quiet about how you feel about things.
I'm much more likely to blurt out something that I maybe should keep to myself than I am to conceal something to try and deceive people. No.
So. If you ever are a centrist, I'm sure you'll be loud and proud about it. Okay, I had one other question I had for you about this article. Where you say, I've lost track of the number of times that a reader has told me they have a friend who would benefit greatly from reading my writing, but that they're too nervous to send it because of the potential for backlash. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, just what do you say to those people? Mm-hmm. And what do you have any thoughts on sort of how to reach out to those friends? Who maybe need, who maybe their lives might be better if they we're a bit less ideological or whatever you want to say about this stuff.
Yeah, I've totally thought about writing a full piece on this. Either trying to bridge the gap to people that are still in, or trying to speak to the friends of social justice warriors who are what do I do? How do I handle this?
Right.
And yeah, it's tough because when someone's in that state of mind, they can be so defensive and reactive and suspicious and a bunch of other very charming characteristics.
Right. And I guess they might outright object to reading something you write as the bait, right? Because you haven't been vetted yet. So you, I'm not allowed to read that blog.
Yeah, I mean, I think worst case scenario is not just that they hate the piece, but that they disown the friend who sent it to them, because now the friend is tainted by my reading my work and suggesting it, right? That I think that's really what the risk feels like for people probably. And it's tough. I mean, I think it's just I'd probably just say part of it's just living by example. If you're happy and you have hobbies and you hang out with people and things are going well for you as they're getting increasingly miserable and isolated, even just not cutting ties, if you can manage that, I think is good. And just I'd say a combination of I don't know if you've ever heard, what's it called? I'm gonna mess this up, but anyways, it's called gray stoning, or it's this idea. The wrestling term is called no selling, and it's when someone tries to rile you up and it just doesn't work. You just do not respond to it when they're freaking out at you about something.
Right, totally. When someone wants to get riled up about something with you, and they're getting riled up, but. Yeah, totally. You're I don't know. Sounds kind of bad, I guess.
So don't get into that sort of cycle with them. And I'd say just try as much as possible to focus on their well-being, right? Maybe seeing about directing things towards it seems like this is really stressful for you. How are you doing?
Interesting. Totally. That's a real cognitive behavioral sort of technique, right? The focusing on the result of the behavior, right? So you Google before you read a book, you always make sure that it's by the right author. Is that working for you? Does that make you happy, right? Does that lead you closer to your goals? That sort of thing.
Totally.
just sort of like the functional purpose of it. Like not, do you think it's right or wrong, but like, is it working or is it not working for you?
Exactly. I think honestly that's really worth it, because I think trying to like challenge things head on. I mean, it's kind of funny because it's sort of the same advice for like people who have like conspiracy theorist relatives or whatever. Not that those are the same, but that it's like when someone's like really locked into a belief system, you can't necessarily, like take it head on. But what you can do is like stay connected to that person, express care for that person, and like maybe ask like questions about how their belief system or their politics is in relation to how they're doing. And I think just also like as much as possible, just like reminding them that there's other ways to live, right? That like other people, like you can care about politics and like not stay online until 4 a.m. screaming on Twitter every night, right? Like
totally. Or you can also not care about politics, right? Is that I feel like when people really care about politics, it's so easy to forget that like a lot of people just don't care about their friends and family and like work or whatever. It's like it doesn't have to be central at all. It's not there's no law.
No, exactly. And like if the only thing like that's keeping that person like acting the way they are is that they just have like this unimaginable amount of like shame and guilt that like if they stop doing it, like they're a terrible person and terrible things will happen. Like it's just that's catastrophic thinking, babe.
Yeah, totally.
So
totally. You almost need like exposure therapy where it's like, okay, how about just for an hour? You don't do anything political. See how it feels, right? Will the world collapse? Let's find out.
It's like if you could just convince them to like come with you to a barbecue, play some frisbee.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, Super Bowl party or something.
The best like day they've had in like 10 years.
Yeah, totally. Unless, of course, someone says something problematic that they have to stand up against.
That's the risk. So that they cancel everyone at the barbecue.
Sorry, barbecue.
Yep.
All right, the other article we wanted to talk about is titled Democracy Dies Behind Paywalls, published in The Atlantic and written by Richard Stengel. And, I mean, basically it's about what the title says, that in order to keep elections good and journalism with its integrity, that specifically he thinks that all the big news websites should get rid of their paywalls for election coverage, specifically for like the 2024 America Biden versus Trump election. Mm-hmm. What do you think of this idea?
Well, I think the thing I have to say off the top is that The Atlantic put this article behind a paywall.
I know.
That was like extremely annoying. And I know like they did address it in the article in this like, oh, we're talking right to you, audience behind the paywall type of way. But like that annoyed me. It's like, this is literally like, this is where your argument for taking down the paywall is, and you paywall it.
Totally.
That
you
honestly,
couldn't even convince The Atlantic to take this single article not behind the paywall.
Exactly. So that kind of put a bad taste in my mouth. I'm willing to,
sure.
The rest of the article is worth talking about, but I just thought that was really silly. And I also
totally.
It said like, if you're reading this, you've probably paid to support journalism, blah, blah. And I'm like, honey, there's still a lot of workarounds. Like you can't assume.
Totally.
But anyways.
It's not I think The Atlantic in particular has a fairly leaky paywall, which I mean, they choose to have that. They could make you have to sign in, but they don't. It does remind me too that website, they have lots of articles about like the scariness of AI, and you can listen to them read aloud by an AI at the top of every article. It's Genius. Like, AI is going to take away our jobs. And then it's like, well, we could have hired a voice actor to do this, but meh. It's fun. Yeah, clearly some disagreements between the writers at The Atlantic and the business folk, I guess.
Mm-hmm. But it does have like a really interesting like central idea, right? Which is that like basically paywalls create a two-tiered system, and so the super high quality journalism is behind a paywall, and
Totally.
the drivel conspiratorial mishmash. There's tons of that. You could endlessly have that for free, and it's something. I think in the article it said like 80% of Americans don't pay for any news, right?
Yep.
So 80% of Americans are relying on whatever's not behind the paywall to make up their minds.
Totally. Yeah, it is interesting. It was an interesting piece. I felt like, I don't know. I do feel like there were some things, misunderstandings maybe in it. Like, I guess the core of it would be, I feel like most people who don't pay for any journalism wouldn't be reading it if it was free. They don't care about it enough to pay for it, or care enough about it to read it, would be my guess about those people. So the idea, I don't know, there's sort of this sense in the article of like, we need to let this stuff be free so that the masses will learn and come to agree with me. Right. And I feel like, I don't know, like it would be a hard thing to study, but I would bet it would have a pretty negligible effect on like election outcomes. I don't know.
Right, totally.
It's hard to picture like the low information voter who doesn't ever consider paying for news to be like, oh, now that it's free, I'm going to read the New York Times every day.
Well, I do think there was one paragraph, one or two near the end that were kind of interesting, though, that was saying like, it seemed that when online newspapers made their COVID coverage free, that they actually ended up getting a bunch of paid subscribers shortly thereafter. Totally. Yeah, so
which maybe, I think it is compelling. Like, as a business idea, I think it makes sense.
Right, but you're talking about
like
the effect.
Save the world kind of kind of thing. And I feel like there's like a different way to think of it that might make sense. It's just like, instead of like, let's make all of the election coverage free, it's like, it seems to me that you have some articles that are like broad-based that like all of America might be interested in. And then you have other articles that are like really nerdy details that most people probably don't and probably shouldn't care about. Right? Like this week, I've been reading stuff about like the details of jury selection in the Manhattan Trump case.
Right.
And that sort of thing, I think, is fine to put behind paywalls because it doesn't, I don't know, because it's like only for enthusiasts.
That's a good point. Like, how exactly would you decide, like, what falls under election coverage? Like, how narrow or wide would you make that?
Totally. Well, and it's like, I feel like the main problem isn't, it's like, the hard thing for campaigns, I think, is to get people to care or read about things at all, like to get a story that breaks through and isn't like, it's not behind a paywall because like it's everywhere all over Instagram and TikTok, right? Like that's the end state that I think campaigns would hope for. And I guess I just don't see the paywall as like that big of a barrier to that sort of thing happening, right? It's like you have your news-based TikToker who does pay for the New York Times and who finds the juiciest headlines and who reads those out loud on TikTok, looking, making jokes or whatever, and then the story spreads. And that's like the route that gets to the low information voter.
That is, yeah. But I also feel like that's kind of when telephone comes into play, right? Like, and it happens. I mean, I watched it happen.
Totally, yeah.
On Instagram, right? Like there have been a couple like real like fake news moments that have spread really rapidly among people that I know because it fits, right? Like it fits with their preconceived notions of things. Totally. And so they're like, of course that happened, right? Like it kind of doesn't get caught by their filters. And I wonder that, right? Because I have like a very, very political bunch of followers and, people I follow as well. And I'm like, how many of us are even reading the news directly? Like, are most of us just watching each other on here?
And hoping that someone is paying to see what's behind the paywall.
Yeah, exactly. And I did think the article pointed out that back when like physical magazines were a big thing, the Time magazine estimated that the
Right.
pass along rate of every issue was 10 to 15 people. So what that means is that for each one, physical magazine they produce, that magazine would get passed along, and
Totally.
10
Yeah.
to
It's like
15
you read
people
it
would read it.
and you leave it in a coffee shop or whatever, and then the next person reads it. Yeah.
And I think about that. Like, I think about that with like ebooks, right? It's like, I don't pass on my ebook to someone else if I finish it, and that I see as being an issue, where it's like, if I read this really compelling thing about the election, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, like, you got to check this out, and they can't, and nobody can unless they pay the whatever it is monthly fee.
Yeah.
Especially because there's no micropayments, right? Like, almost nowhere can you just be like, I want to read this one article. This is like, here
It's
you
true.
go. Here's 50 cents. And, this is the one thing I want to look at. So when it comes to being like, oh, do you want to pay monthly or annually for this one thing that you want to read? It's like...
Yeah. Although I do feel like the micropayments would set you up with a bunch of different problems. Where it's
true.
like
It's
the only
true.
way... I don't know. It's like, I think the New York Times has it right with their subscription, because it's like they have a certain amount of money coming in every month that they can like budget for it.
Yes.
Whereas if you had to like micropayment, then it's almost like the same incentives of advertising, right? Where it's like, I need to reach as many people as I can
that's
to
a
get
good
as many
point.
micropayments as I can. And then your incentives no longer is like, I need to do right by my readers. And it's like, I need to spread far and wide. What's the craziest story we can come up with?
Yeah.
Which
No, that's a good point. I'm sure it would have its issues, but what it means is that you can't pass things along very easily.
Totally.
And I think that's a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I mean, you can't pass. I mean, definitely like the long form, like argument sort of piece. I feel like the like factual information is pretty easy to pass on, right? Because it's like, if it's like simple news reporting of like a thing that happened, I mean, that sort of story almost always gets immediately picked up by a bunch of not paywalled news sites.
Yes, if you're just trying to fact check like one like juicy statistic or something like that, that's usually not too hard.
Totally. But and the other thing that they did bring up was the idea that like the big social media sites are all largely moving away from news as like a thing that they promote on the feed, right? Because it's all algorithmic feeds, and so they definitely have a thumb on the scale for what people are shown. And there was that quote from Adam Mosseri from Threads. I think he was the founder of Instagram beforehand. But he said, my take is, from a platform's perspective, any incremental engagement or revenue news might drive is not worth all the scrutiny, negativity, or integrity risks that come along with them. Which is interesting. I
mean, it's like, on the one hand, it's like he's not necessarily wrong about it, but it's also infuriating, because it's like, this is where people are going for information. So if you're going to be like, oh yeah, no, we don't do news, it's like, I feel like that's such an impoverished approach. It's frustrating too. Like, Instagram just has this new setting, and it is like basically like hide political content, and it has been default turned on for every single user.
Whoa.
And you have to discover that it exists and go in and turn it off to probably see people like me.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think, and here's the thing, the article kind of dug into this a bit, where it's like, let's see, right. So there was this NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights that had a paper, that the greatest tech-related threat in 2024 is not artificial intelligence or foreign election interference, but something more mundane: the retreat from content moderation and the hollowing out of trust and safety units and election integrity teams. And I clicked in because basically there was a mention that like these platforms have been weakening, like they've been like getting smaller and smaller teams that are doing, this type of work. And it's like, oh man, maybe that's why they did the little turn politics off thing on Instagram, right? Because maybe it's easier for them than actually having people working on these programs. Because because there was a CNBC article. The title was "Tech Layoffs Ravage the Teams That Fight Online Misinformation and Hate Speech" by Hayden Field and Jonathan Vanyan. And I just thought this was interesting. This was from last summer. And basically, Meta had spent like 6 months building a fact-checking tool that would allow for third-party fact-checkers like the Associated Press or Reuters to, well, basically do like the notes that are on X now, right? Like the community notes type of
the
thing.
Community note, where it's like if you lie, then a little thing pops up being like the community says that's a lie.
Yeah, which is so funny that came in under Musk, because this tool sounds very similarly. But basically, it got killed. They decided not to like budget for this tool to actually roll out, and so it just never happened.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it is. I feel like it does drive home the point that like all the social media platforms are businesses, right? And it's like it's hard to. I feel like they did spend a few years trying to work a little like against their own incentives a bit to like win public opinion back. Like I after the 2016 election, I feel like a lot of blame was laid at the feet of Facebook, right? And they spent some years being like, okay, no, we're going to be like good again. We want everyone to think we're good. And then they tried, and I think it basically didn't take. And I think they gave up on that as a goal. Now they're like, we don't want to be the most trusted source for news. We want to be the most funny source for cat videos.
100%.
And it's like, it probably is the right business decision. And it does leave the world in a weird place where it's like everyone moved away from, physical newspapers and moved away from watching television and moved on to these apps that used to provide news alongside memes and now are deciding to not show news so much anymore. And it's like, do people care enough about news to download a separate app that is focused on news? Or are they just going to be happily scrolling their Instagram feed, not notice anything changed, and just like hear less news than they heard before?
Yeah, no, it does seem like this weird pickle where it's like the things that would probably like help with media literacy and like news being like more high quality news being like more widely disseminated. Those might have like the opposite solutions to apps that want more and more and more attention, more and more and more time. They want to drive like high emotions, strong emotions to keep you in there. Like, you know what I mean? Like it might totally make the app more boring if like it was more measured or like, so yeah, I mean, maybe it's the wrong place to look for solutions, but it does suck because it's like, that is just where so many people are, regardless of whether we think that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, and then it's like, there's the part of it that's like genuine consumer choice. I feel like people could be choosing to read more news, and they generally don't. And is that good for democracy? Probably not. Is it like, does that mean you should argue against like how people are choosing to live their lives? That feels weird to me, to be like, no, it's wrong. You shouldn't be spending time on TikTok. You should be spending time reading the Washington Post. Exactly. That's just weird. That I don't know how to sort of reconcile those two things, right? Where it's like, this is worse if we all do this, but I don't want to like, I don't know. It doesn't feel like my place to tell people what to do.
It's apples to oranges. Yeah. Like, well, and also like we do have to be careful about being like, oh, so are we going to like limit voting to like only people with a college education?
No.
Like, do you have to like pass an IQ test? Like, do we want to go in that direction? Like, does that sound,
No.
Right. So it's like, yeah, some people are single issue voters. Some people are low info voters. Like that's it's one of the cons to the system, but if we believe that there are more pros than cons, then we kind of have to like live with them and maybe figure out how to mitigate them better. But like, we can't just like, I don't know. I think that it would be like a hugely bad idea to kind of try and like segregate people in some way around like intellect or information.
Totally. I don't know. It's like this article really argues for the idea that like, I have it written down here somewhere, but the idea that like information is like the bedrock of democracy, right? That like a knowledgeable populace is the core component. Do you have a thought on this?
I'm glad you brought this up because I wanted to briefly mention like this underlying like progressive belief of this article that's just kind of taken for granted. And that is that democracy is on the ballot in November.
Right.
Do you think democracy is on the ballot in November?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, I mean, to some degree, I think that's not a totally wild thing to say. Like just reading some of the, what is I can't remember. It's called like Operation 2025 or something. It's like a think tank that is like planning what Trump should do. That seems like it will probably be executed, if he wins. And a lot of it is sort of, it's hard to measure how democratic a society is, but there are scales or whatever, right? Like, how much does the state control media, that sort of thing. And if implemented, this plan would move the states down a few notches.
Okay. And it's like
on that list.
This is like these are the like Trump strategists.
Yeah, it's I think generally understood that he will take up these plans.
Okay, that's interesting.
So I think it's, I think it's reasonable. I mean, it's the sort of like we won't have a democracy anymore, I think overstates it by a lot.
Right.
And like, even is this the biggest threat the democracy has faced, I think might overstate it, just like how, I don't know, politics were very different 100 years ago, right? It was a lot more like patronage sort of stuff that we would consider corruption from our point of view. But I think democracy's on the ballot, probably to some degree. But it's also, I don't know, there's this idea of like if everyone consumed the right information and understood everything, they'd all vote the same way I vote. It's like this question of like, can someone vote Trump without having been misinformed? I think a lot of people think, no, that's impossible. If they just knew what I knew, they would never vote Trump. And it's, I don't know. I don't know what to think of that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the thing is like the people that are like super anti-Trump are like, obviously he's a bad person. How could you support someone like that? And most of the people that support Trump know that he's a bad person, but that's not like their number one criteria in picking a politician. So there is like a huge sort of like, because I have gotten to the point where like I can watch a Trump speech like purely like imagining that he is a stand-up comedian.
Yeah, totally.
And he's fun. Like he's very funny.
He is funny. I think he has funny like pronunciations and like good comedic timing and that sort of thing. He's very funny. And if you can just like tune out what everything means and like not think about the consequences, not like just completely like at an aesthetic level, right? Like just the level of performance. As an entertainer, right? He kills it when he's speaking. Totally. I mean, his main thing is doing like the big arena shows where he gets everyone laughing and cheering. That's like what if he has a skill, that's what it is, I think.
Yeah. Well,
Wait, I do remember that I set up a thing and we got way sidetracked. But yeah, my thought on the uninformed populace is the bedrock of democracy. I don't know if I fully buy into that. I feel like maybe democracy is like remarkably good at dealing with an uninformed populace. Maybe it's like a system that not everyone actually needs to understand all the issues, but the fact that like, I don't know, maybe I would say maybe the core brilliance of democracy is like the peaceful transition of power, and that if you do think that there's something wrong with how things work, you can convince people to vote your way and change things that way, as opposed to assassinating whoever's in charge and taking the role. I don't know. It's just like a fundamental like axiom of this article that I was like, I don't know if I don't want to say that an informed populace would be bad, but just I don't know if it's the worst thing in the world for some people not to read the news. I think maybe the system can handle that.
Yeah, like maybe like a democratic system like protects against the ability for a really outlandish rumor or belief to suddenly like have a catastrophic effect. Like, and there was a brief period where like belief in QAnon was like extraordinarily high, really. But there was like that one gunman. Maybe there were a couple other.
Oh,
but
yeah,
basically,
the pizza place guy.
It was more like there were people who experienced psychosis that expressed itself through QAnon in like a couple isolated incidents.
Yeah.
More so than, I mean, okay, I guess there's January 6th, but even then, like democracy held. Mike Pence did not stand behind Trump, right? Like the ballots were removed and the government didn't fall. So I guess my hope is that, you know, even if there is another Trump presidency, that, you know, the institutions continue to hold regardless of like what antics he gets up to.
Yeah, no, and I think that's not unreasonable, particularly if he doesn't also hold both houses of Congress. I think it'll be pretty hard.
That would be
it will be a tough challenge to like fully dismantle American democracy, even with 2 terms. And if there's another guy in the middle there messing up your plans, I think, might make it through. Totally, yeah. The idea that it's like, if we lose this election, we won't have another election. I'd be surprised. I think there's going to be a 2028 election. I'd bet on that. Wow. So I guess we're both officially outed centrists now. No, just kidding.
Yeah. Well,
a bit of show news, I guess.
Yeah, we had a tiny bit of show news before we sign off, which is that I'm going to take 3 months off to work on the second draft of my memoir. So we will be back in August.
Yeah. We're both. Yeah, I'm also going to take 3 months off because this show would not be the same without you, Kier.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we might come back with a bit of a rebrand. I think you have a graphic designer all ready to make some changes. And when we come back, you might be like, what is the show in my podcast feed? I didn't subscribe to this, but it'll be us.
It's us.
And new and improved.
Yeah, totally. We got some survey results back from you guys too, so we'll be taking a look at that. And just kind of getting a soft relaunch, something like that come early August. And I'm looking forward to it. And I'm also hoping that sometime in the next decade, you'll be able to get my memoir on a shelf somewhere. So I got to keep plugging away at that. Right on.
Excellent.
Well, this has been Hot Take Think Tank. Until next time.
I did the thing. I always interrupt you because I was going to say, talk to you not so soon. Pretty good, right? Let's just leave that in. That's the end.
This is perfect. Bye.
Bye.